Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Undergraduate Student Team Research Concept Competition. During the next 30 or 40 minutes, we'll hear from 3 teams presenting their research concepts. These teams will explain the challenges associated with their research concepts and the steps they would take to develop the research. Note that these presentations are an exercise in developing research approaches, and the teams are not required to implement the research following today's presentation. If you'd like to provide feedback to the teams, please provide comments via the link that I will paste in the chat. Just one quick note on the form, the online form does say graduate, but that's a mistake, so just ignore the title. Each team has 5 minutes to present, followed by 5 minutes of questions and answers. Due to the short presentation times, usually one team member will present. To expedite the Q&A, all questions for the teams must be posted in the chat window. The teams have been instructed to answer the questions that best help them explain the big picture of their research. So please do not be offended if the teams do not have time to answer every question. Once a team's total time is up, I'll cut off the Q&A in order to allow the next team time to present. Among us today are also 3 judges who will score each of the presentations. Be sure to attend. Sorry, thank you to the judges, and everyone be sure to attend the award ceremony Thursday at 2:30 to see which team wins the grand prize. So we're going to proceed in alphabetical order based on the title of the presentation. Please bear with us as we kind of alternate between teams, as that may take a few seconds. So the first team up is artificial photosynthesis. Who will be sharing screen and presenting on that one?
I'll be sharing the screen, and we have multiple presenters. So
okay, so as long as you're sharing the screen, I think we're going to be okay with making you the co-host. So why don't you go ahead and pop that up on the share screen?
Okay.
And you can begin when you're ready.
Okay. So our team decided to focus our research on the development of artificial photosynthesis. The presenters are myself, Lena Hoover, who's a chemical engineering student, Lana Hoover, a mechanical engineering student, and Priya Bhakta, a computer and electrical engineering student. And so our research goal was to create an efficient artificial photosynthesis device that had the purpose of removing carbon dioxide or CO2 from the atmosphere. And the reason that we wanted to focus on this project was to help decrease the levels of CO2, the rising levels of CO2 that are in the atmosphere. CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and its remediation is vital for making our society sustainable in the near future. And so the current state of research on this research goal is in the realm of natural photosynthesis. Different steps of the process are being recreated in labs. However, there's no comprehensive combination of the steps to make a device that can efficiently remove CO2 from the atmosphere and have a large scale impact. So that's where our research comes in. And the summary of the processes that we started taking and plan to take if we continue the research would be a literature search to compile previous research. This is what we started to kind of identify the challenges. Then we'd identify catalysts for chemical reactions, look at the device design and assembly, look at the device safety, and then look at the testing and refinement of the device in different environments. And so artificial photosynthesis is based off of natural photosynthesis, which commonly occurs in the leaves of plants and other organisms. Here, carbon dioxide plus water becomes glucose plus oxygen, and glucose is a sugar that the plant uses. And so in nature, the reaction is split up into different steps that occur separately, but also simultaneously. And we wanted to kind of mimic this as engineers. And so the first step was light harvesting, which is pretty much the sun as an energy source gives energy to the plant cell. We would also be using the sun as an energy source in our design. The next step is putting all the energy into a concentrated area so that it can be applied to the chemical reaction. And this would look like wiring and circuitry inside. The next 2 steps, the first one being water splitting, which is a popular area of research, is when the hydrogen off of water comes off of it to make oxygen. And the hydrogen is going to go into the Calvin cycle, where carbon dioxide is going to be reduced to a sugar. And these 2 steps use catalysts.
So here are some definitions of terms that we're going to mention throughout. Firstly, a catalyst is a chemical reaction, allows a chemical reaction to proceed faster. As seen in the photo, the orange line representing the catalyst is much lower than the original. Secondly, electrolysis is when electric current creates chemical change, which is a loss or gain of electrons, which is seen in the schematic below. A possible initial design would be a solid oxide electrolysis cell. And here water and carbon dioxide would enter the salt and hydrogen, carbon monoxide and oxygen would exit. However, carbon monoxide is toxic, so we would have to react carbon monoxide and hydrogen to create methanol or methoxide, which both have the potential to be converted into a usable fuel. And a potential catalyst we would use would be nickel. Initial experiments would be assembling the electrolysis cell and next testing the cell for its efficiency. Also, the reactions of the byproducts could be tested for safety analysis.
All right, so this is a basic schematic of how we want to design our project. Basically, CO2 is going to be taken in through this vacuum tube, and this filter here is going to filter out any unwanted particles that might enter the tube. And along with H2O, the CO2 is going to be taken in through the solid oxide electrolysis, which is our main catalyst. And just like natural photosynthesis, we're going to power this device using solar panels. And our end product is going to be oxygen, and our byproduct will be methanol or methoxide. And although we've made our experiment, we're going to be facing many challenges, one of them being the design, optimization, and modeling. We need to consider how air is going to be distributed throughout the atmosphere, and we need to identify alternative materials while considering the cost effectiveness, limiting the waste, and the environmental impact on the ecosystem and society. So people who may benefit from this are cities in which cars produce CO2 emissions, fossil fuel factories, concrete factories, mines, and the auto industries, which are the largest CO2 emitters, and potentially chemical suppliers, which who would be interested in the methanol or methoxide byproducts.
And so as a chemical engineering student, I would be looking a lot at the catalyst identification, the chemical compatibility, and byproduct value, looking at how safe everything is when it combines with each other, as well as biomimicry and designing it off of the biological system. A chemistry expert would be helpful in looking at the reactions.
As a mechanical engineer, I'd be looking at the material selection, the schematic design, the cell assembly and machinery, and the airflow distribution.
As a computer and electrical engineering student, I'll be looking at the main power source, which is going to be a solar panel, semiconductor design, the sensor incorporation, and the general circuitry and machinery.
And so here's some references we used in the presentation. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have questions for the chat?
So a question that we have is the cell under consideration a chemical cell comparable to a battery or a solid state cell, excuse me. I believe that the solid oxide electrolysis cell is more comparable to a solid state cell. It's kind of similar to the fuel cells used, which is more of a new technology. So it's not necessarily a battery. Another question we have is, have you looked at the cost? What will the cost of just basically what is the cost and how marketable will it be?
That is something that we will consider. So depending on the material we use, which is going to be nickel, that is something that's low cost. A catalyst will be low cost and it's easy to find. And marketable, we will have to consult with the fossil fuel factories. That's something that fossil fuel factories in cities, that's something that will be invested in this.
And furthermore, the product is very marketable as CO2 emissions has become such a large problem that we need to start looking at viable ways to scrub it out of our atmosphere. Another question we have is, our team is all engineers. Have you considered business or economic majors as a part of our team?
That would be a great addition to the team. We, as engineers, would design a product and could start looking into that, but that would be definitely people we'd want to include later in the design or even in the beginning to start marketing.
Mm-hmm. Another question we have is, could you please describe how your team members came together? we're all from different engineering backgrounds. We came together as we just met in college, and we've all been super passionate about sustainability and the environment, and we definitely want to make a difference in our careers, which is one of the big reasons why we became engineers in the first place. So it was just something we were all super excited to do. Another question we have is, how scalable might our project be?
So our project, we were anticipating like a smaller type of device that could be applied onto like different buildings in different cities, rather than like a factory type of thing. And we'd want to make it cost effective and the resources available so that we could make a lot of them to make a difference and make it scalable to put in different cities or having multiple in Albuquerque or something.
Yeah, we definitely want our device to be a overall solution for the problem of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
And the next team is Cross-Sectional Analysis of Alcohol Misuse and Violent Crimes. Who will be the presenter on that one?
It will be both. It will be me, Nora, and Raven, and I will be the one sharing screen.
Okay, I think you're ready to go. I think you're able to share screen.
Yep. So hello, everybody. Welcome to our presentation over the cross-sectional analysis of alcohol misuse and violent crime in the city of Albuquerque. Us three are members of the UNM MARC program. My name is Anthony Abeta Lopez. My majors are chemistry and biology, and I have prior experience in cheminformatics and drug discovery. So hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isenara Chalar, and I'm majoring in biochemistry, and my experiences include neurosciences and biology, and my contribution for this research project will be gathering the toxicology report and also determining effects of alcohol for brain development and also the correlation of aggressive behavior with alcoholism.
Hi, my name is Raven Delphina Otero Symphony, and in addition to my statistics background, I also bring a sociology perspective. My primary contribution to this project will be cross-sectional analysis, focus groups, and qualitative methodology. So to begin, violent crime rates and substance addiction are two crises the city of Albuquerque faces, with the allocation upwards 1/3 of the city budget for public safety alone that's putting the city decades in debt. Though few local studies have been conducted, two respectively found that a majority of incarcerated women at the local county jail struggled with alcohol addiction, while the other found that neighborhoods with public high schools were 399% more at risk for drug crimes than those without. Replacing schools with alcohol establishments and drug crimes with violent crimes, our first research goal aims to establish correlation between these two factors amongst the 16 zip codes geographic regions in Albuquerque.
Our second research goal is primarily based in scientific literature. There is already scientific knowledge based in that alcohol consumption already affects individuals, not only physiologically, but psychologically. And there has been established a correlation between alcohol consumption and severity of violent crimes. In fact, European researchers have stated that 89% to 76% of violent crime occurrence is in relation to alcohol consumption, either directly or indirectly. So with this in mind, we hope to analyze the local relationship between alcohol consumption tolerance and the intensity of violent crimes within the city of Albuquerque.
For our first research goal methodology, we will export violent crime incidents and zip code data from the Metropolitan Detention Center Corrections Database and the City of Albuquerque Crime Map. By merging these data sets, the likelihood of false reporting is decreased, such as where a violent crime is reported, but it never actually happened. Cross-sectional analysis will then be conducted. Potential parameters of the model are briefly described below as beta coefficients and include violent crime and alcohol factors. Other factors such as violent crime type, sex, age, gender, and ethnicity may also be added if available. These analyses will be conducted in a computational statistics program such as RStudio, which has no cost associated with it. The timeline may be somewhat impacted while waiting for clearance into the MTC corrections databases, and thus the estimated timeline for analysis is 3 to 4 months or less.
Our primary data sources for research goal number 2 will be the MDC corrections database, toxicology reports, and focus groups in order to obtain information regarding blood alcohol content and violent crime occurrence. In order to conduct this study, we hope to conduct focus group interviews with NDC inmates to gather information on their crimes committed and BAC at time of arrest or instance of crime. Following this, we'll categorize BAC content of MDC inmates with behavioral indicators from literature, This can be either from scientific papers or from law enforcement policy. And finally, we'll determine the correlation between violent crime severity and BAC. The budget for this project will be upwards of $500, primarily used for chemistry incentives for individuals to participate in focus groups. And the timeline to conduct this experiment will be 12 to 18 months based on COVID restrictions and based on our ability to ascertain a good enough population to actively study this project.
One challenge for the first research goal is data interpretation. Because crime mapping reports violent crime incidents at one point in time, only a cross-sectional analysis is allowed. So predictive trend modeling cannot be used. More importantly, the study results should not be used for which areas to police more, as this increases violent crime rates and also destabilizes community networks, particularly amongst minorities. For our second research goal, there may be inconsistent data reporting due to several factors. Full BAC information may be lacking due to inaccurate police reports. Further, ethical considerations may be put in place due working with a state supervised population. A final challenge is cautioning public policy interpretation. For example, ethnicity is not a predictive factor for being at risk to violent crime, but rather lack of adequate resources in an impoverished area is.
Finally, a note on our approach to this topic, because although multiple regression and focus groups aren't exactly novel in themselves, using them with the issues of substance addiction and violent crime have profound applications at the local level from this new STEM perspective. This includes incentivizing the field of toxicology to other drugs like opioids, public health initiatives, not to mention applications in economics, public policy, sociology, and more. Thank you. All right, taking a look at the chat here, and does anybody have any questions? Okay, here's one. Can you expand on the aim of the focus group? What kind of information/data are you hoping to get from this part of the project? These conversations are likely to be sensitive as they involve substance abuse, crime, etc. That's a great question, and that certainly has to do with some of the ethical considerations of dealing with the state supervised population of incarcerated people. The focus group for the second phase of this project is really kind of building off of what we learned from the first half for the correlation across the 16 zip code regions. So in police reports, whenever they book someone at the MDC, they have the associated zip code with that information. And so from these focus groups, we're hoping to get more information specifically on the blood alcohol content and to look at this more from a toxicology biomedical perspective. And I believe Anthony can speak more on this topic as well. I think we're having...
Anthony, I think you're...
I apologize for that. So a big issue with alcohol abuse and specifically drug substance usage is dosage. So whenever we're talking about a specific drug or talking about a specific pharmaceutical drug, we always have to take a look at dosage and seeing how that impairs the behavior of someone more than just their biological system. How is that going to affect their behavior? And how is this going to affect the severity of their crime? For example, a robbery is going to be a much different severity of a crime versus that of homicide. So we're looking to not only look at their individual crimes, but we're also wanting to take a look at their behavior, supposed behavior at time of occurrence of the crime.
Another question is, how will you ensure that the sample population is of all the demographics? And that's a great question. In terms of ethnicity, demographic information, we're really gonna have to be relying a lot on the data sets. And this is a potential challenge with the research project, that there might be some missing information there. However, across the 16 geographic areas, we're likely gonna have a good amount of mix of minority and majority ethnicities just because of the demographic makeup of Albuquerque as a whole. But we do expect to see some skewing perhaps in which ethnicities may be disproportionately affected by these particular incidences, especially communities that are impacted by, you know, let's say impacted by the substance abuse issues and the alcohol substance addiction, let's just put it that way. So it is going to be a part of the research. Let's see, how are we looking on time? 2 minutes? There might be value in health, emergency, urgent care information too. There might be issues in aggregating per administrative units, but it's a good start. It might be worth considering where issues occur and also the locations of home or daily activities. Those are certainly parameters that we can also include. The only caution is making sure that we're not including too many parameters, which is why we tried to restrict it down to alcohol establishments specifically, especially because we're trying to investigate the relationship between violent crime and alcohol. But that is certainly that we can consider in the expansion of the model. And then I think lastly here, can you explain the outcomes? Who is the audience for the outcome of the study and how did they use it? Here, we have several audiences. I can speak to the public policy side. We don't have specific correlation in the city of Albuquerque looking at these two factors. And as a result, this could certainly benefit resource allocation as well as funding. Right now, public safety is the most funded department, and that includes things like hiring more police officers, not necessarily connecting released people from the jail to resources that can help them reintegrate into society, which literature shows that a public health approach is more effective than a public safety approach in reducing violent crime rates specifically. I don't know if my other team members want to speak to the toxicology aspect of this.
Sure. So talking from a more pharmacological aspect and talking more from a drug treatment, drug discovery standpoint, whenever we're taking a look at primarily drug dosing and we're looking at how the drug design and how drug abuse is used, we primarily look at biological systems. How does it affect not only their example, neurobiological behavior, but how does it affect their behavior? And that is behavior, how they act out, how they interact with social relationships, and how they interact with their own community. So looking at this further can primarily open up avenues for researchers in drug discovery to take those into account when looking at potential harms of using pharmaceutical drugs or looking at drug abuse studies.
Thank you so much, and that is our time. So our next group is going to be impact of a green default nudge on resource conservation. Who will be sharing screen there?
I will be. Matthew.
Okay, you're a co-host and should be able to share screen when you're ready.
And just to make sure you can see my screen.
Yes, indeed.
Perfect, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katrina Dutt, and my colleague Matthew and I will be sharing our research concept to study the impact of a green default nudge on resource conservation. Next, please. So our research goal is to evaluate the impact of this nudge, and we will be using UNM printing as a case study. So first, a nudge is a way to indirectly suggest a way to influence behavior. And so in our case, our nudge would be to try to make conservation the default. And we would do this by changing the default printing settings around campus from single-sided to double-sided printing. And this might look a little bit differently depending on the class of printing. We've identified 3 across campus. The first one has to do with the WEPA printing machines that are around campus, where students can pay by the page to print. Then student residents can print at the main housing office with a prepaid allotment. And then lastly, students can pay or can print for free at resource centers, such as the Women's Resource Center and the El Centro de la Raza. So to dive in a little bit deeper, we would like to examine whether the nudge will actually reduce the number of pages printed enough to reduce CO2 emissions. And as you can see, a single page of paper only emits a fraction of a pound of CO2, but we think that when scaled up, as it would in a university setting, this can make a big difference. We'd also like to explore whether cost perception can alter the success of the nudge in changing behavior. As I mentioned earlier, the 3 different classes of printing have 3 different perceptions of cost. The first one, the WEPA ones, students actually have to pay out of pocket. And in the last 2, they're essentially free to the student. So we really want to know, will students who feel like they're printing for free change their behavior enough to reduce paper usage? And then we've identified some challenges to this already. For one, the COVID-19 pandemic really influences how we set up our study, since the move to online classes has drastically reduced printing on campus. So that means that we'd have to make our reference year and gathering our baseline data set before the implementation of the nudge. That would have to occur after the pandemic and once students return to in-class classes. And again, gaining access to data and technology require a lot of coordination within multiple departments on campus, including IT, housing, and resource centers. And then since WIPA is an external company that manages the printing settings, it would be a little bit difficult to access those, especially if it might be infringing on their business model.
So yeah, our plan is to implement a 2-year data collection timeline with the upcoming academic year being our reference year in order to establish baseline usage patterns and printing patterns across campus and across those different classifications. Before we can collect any data, however, we must contact the several different departments on campus that Katrina mentioned, like IT, resource centers, housing, and WIPA, but we also need to contact the IRB office and ensure that our data collection mechanisms are appropriate while still providing us with the requisite data we need to implement this research. Once we are able to collect that data, we want to collect information about total sheets printed in general, as well as total sheets printed by student and class of printing. We also want the percentage of double-sided prints in general, as well as by student and by class, in order to determine whether the success of the nudge at UNM succeeded, as well as if cost perception impacts that success of the nudge. So then during our first year, while we collect our reference year data, we will also need to prepare the nudge for implementation, communicating with the same departments as before to ensure a successful transition in the default setting, switching it from single-sided or simplex to double-sided or duplex. The setting changes will need to occur during that summer after our reference year to ensure we have the full academic year being monitored. Once that nudge is in place, we will collect the same data as before, total sheets printed, as well as percentage of double-sided sheets printed in total, as well as by student and by classification. And lastly, to determine the impacts of the nudge on CO2 emissions, we will compare total number of pages printed before and after the nudge and determine if the differences between the two are significant. And then to determine if cost perception impacts the success of the nudge, we will compare the differences in percentages of double-sided prints given printing classification. We again, for this, will determine significance using the same differences, looking at the differences between those classifications. This should tell us that people are more likely to disregard the nudge if something is free compared to if they have to pay out of pocket.
So clearly, this project would require a lot of teamwork. And so Matthew and I would draw from our different strengths and academic backgrounds to move this forward. I would take the lead on communication and implementation of the nudge. And Matthew has a great brain for data, and so he would do the data analysis part. And overall, it would just take a lot of collaboration.
And so yeah, we will move on to questions. Katrina and I appreciate you listening to our discussion, and we'll field questions from the chat now.
Alrighty, we have a question. Could you access pre-pandemic data for your reference year printing statistics? So that's a great question. We definitely discussed that a lot. I think it'd be hard to access that data since we're not sure if the IT department and all the resource centers have collected it. But I think the main issue with that is that the pandemic has really influenced who prints. And so it seems like teachers might not require as much printing, students might be coming to campus less frequently, et cetera. And so we would really want a baseline data set that we could accurately compare the nudge data set to, and so we can make our conclusions valid.
We have another question. Would you take into account how different majors throughout campus may have different printing needs? Yes, we do want to consider that, and that's why we have those, we want to look at printing by classification and where you're printing, right? Because if you are printing on campus, we will be able to account for that, and looking into that demographic information as well will help to determine whether that cost perception impacts that nudge and the success of that nudge.
Another question, considering interactions your team would initiate on campus, do you have any insights into your work with administrative and technological partners? I think Matthew should take this one.
Yeah, thank you. That's very new for us, right? We are still in that proposal phase and that implementation phase of looking through our research And so we will need to work with many departments on campus, and we are 2 students who need to have that big stake in the game. But once we start implementing the research and our ideas and our goals, hopefully different departments on campus and different high stakes people on campus will buy into what we're doing and hopefully reduce CO2 emissions with us.
Mm-hmm. And Matthew does have experience working with housing departments and other campus initiatives, so he would be a great contact for that as well.
Does this nudge change student behavior or just change how students' options for how they can print? So the goal is to change behavior, right? That's what we're trying to do. Through that implementation of the nudge, they have to now select themselves to print single-sided rather than single-sided being the main option, the first thing they go to when they print. So hopefully that will change behavior, whereas now they have to consciously choose a single-sided print.
And then the question regarding, do we have the university's annual budget for free printing? So I think free printing is kind of in quotes because it does come from student fees. That probably is about how the resource centers can help pay for it and their funding. So we don't have the details yet, but I think we could probably access it with enough connections. And then,
sorry, with that, the free printing, right, is the prepaid allotment for residents on campus. So they've already paid into it. They just got this fund of money that they pull from. WEPA printing is 6 cents for a single-sided sheet or 10 cents for a double-sided sheet. So there's already a little bit of a discount there. And then with those free printings at resource centers, that is through the money provided to resource centers and not directly out of a student's pocket or their fees directly going towards that. Do we have any other questions?
Is there existing research on how often people choose the default option versus other alternatives? I think we would definitely have to up our game on our background research, but I'm sure there is. I know probably most of you have heard of the book called Nudge, and that has a lot of this kind of behavioral economics perspective in that. And so I think those kind of options would be a great resource to look into.
And I think it's also interesting with this nudge, as I don't really look at printing settings when I print, right? And so will people actually look at those printing settings? Will they personally and self-select that single-sided printing setting? So I do believe that people may choose the nudge, but they have to be very intentional if they do choose to disregard the nudge.
And that is time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would encourage everyone to attend the award ceremony via the Attendify tomorrow, and appreciate your creativity, your hard work, your thoughtfulness in building these research concepts. So thank you so much.